School Board meeting of Tuesday, June 19th to order. Everybody would please silence your cell phones. They do. I'm just silencing my cell phone. If you could, we'll start off with an invocation by Pastor Todd Prater of Canoe Creek Christian Church, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by John Boyd. Our mission statement will be read by Darla Bungo. Is she here? Okay. And translation services by Ms. Flores Silva. If you would, please rise with me for our invocation.
Father God, we just thank you for this, God, for this night. We thank you for every adult in this room, man and woman, God, gathered here to discuss the school system, the school board, the schools, every student that's going to be represented, God, across the county. God, we pray, God, for wisdom. God, we pray for clarity. God, we pray for just communication across the board. God, we pray for each student, God, that they would be enjoying their summer, God, but be preparing to come back to school come August. God, just as they begin to further their journey in education. And we pray all this in your name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The mission statement for Osceola District Schools is inspiring all learners to reach their highest potential as responsible, productive citizens.
Thank you, Darla.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ilba Flores Silva with the Multicultural Education Department, and I'm here to provide interpretation services. Muy buenas noches. Me llamo Ilba Flores Silva y estoy aquí para proveer servicios de interpretación. Gracias.
That brings us to comments from the board and the superintendent. Kevin, do you have any?
I sure do. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our public school board meeting. I always try to make a positive comment by sharing something that I have learned or something that I remember from long ago. But this one is something new. I was checking my calendar last week, and I saw that today, just to make sure that I had a school board meeting on the following Tuesday. And I saw in there Juneteenth. I was like, what is interesting? I'm talking about last week here. It said Juneteenth. All right, I didn't think much about it. So today I said I'm going to look up to find out what is Juneteenth. After all, it is today, and a quick Google search should educate me on the matter. So here's what I found out that I didn't know before. Juneteenth is a day, it's a holiday. It's not a national holiday, but it's recognized by some states. And it is to recognize the day that the American slaves back in 1865 were told they were free. And that was pretty interesting because we know from history that the Emancipation Proclamation happened in 1863. Well, it just so happened that, and it's going to sound kind of funny, but back in those days, the president didn't have a tweet account that he could go ahead and let everyone know, guess what, slaves, you're free. The newspapers didn't really make it into the South back in those days. And if it did, a lot of the slaves were not literate. And so they would not have been able to read, and they were not announced. So it so happened that after the end of the war, it's when they finally came to know, hey, guess what? You're free. So why Juneteenth? Well, Juneteenth was when finally the Union Army reached, I believe it was Galveston, Texas. And it was there, and so they decided, hey, these were the last slaves to find out that they have been freed. And it happened in Juneteenth. They called it Juneteenth Day. Very interesting. One final note that I would like to share, and this is a personal note for me. The name. Unlike other holidays, you have this is called Juneteenth. It almost sounds like an invented word or some kind of vernacular. I think that, in my opinion, it's very interesting that it's called Juneteenth. It lends some kind of dignity to what was back then the ignorance of the time, of how the institution of slavery meant that something so impactful in the lives of so many people was unknown to them for at least 2 years in some cases. And so I think it's interesting. I will go ahead and now always remember that this is Juneteenth Day, June 19th. I would encourage that this history be shared with our students and, people talk about it. I think it's a very interesting thing, and I'm glad that I had this opportunity to share it with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Gil. Mr. Weishauer?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention to everybody about my favorite holiday, May-teenth. No, kidding. I have nothing.
Thought maybe that was your birthday. Dr. Pace? And I have nothing either. So that brings us to the Sterling Explorer Award. Mr. Shatera?
Good evening, board, school board members, Ms. Dr. Pace, and leadership team. Just appreciate the opportunity to share tonight about this Florida Sterling Award. And I've asked Mr. Cavaney from the Maintenance Department to join us with his team. We've got Mr. Cavaney, Betty Brown, his secretary, Sean Beck, Don Tarosi, Gammy Diaz, and Chip Bishop. You all would come on up in a minute. The Florida Sterling Council was formed in 1992, aligning with Florida Statutes 110, 235, and 381 as a not-for-profit public-private partnership supported by the Office of the Governor. The Sterling criteria for performance excellence are modeled from the evidence-based National Baldrige Criteria for Performance Excellence. It is a systematic framework for helping organizations improve their return on investment. The mission of the Florida Sterling Council is serving Florida as the epicenter of business quality through assessment, training, and recognition for performance, excellence, and results. The Maintenance Department has actually last year they completed a 2-day assessment in depth where they met, spoke, talked, shared their practices, and as a result, I think it was about a week and a half ago, they were awarded at the conference for Florida Sterling the Explorer Award, and the next step is to move on to the challenge. Can I ask you all to come forward and receive?
On behalf of the board, congratulations, and thank you all for all the hard work you do every day. It doesn't go unnoticed. We greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much, and again, congratulations. Next, we have a presentation from the Osceola County Development Department, Susan Caswell, on Osceola County's sustainability plan. Susan?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Susan Caswell. I am with the Osceola County Community Development Department, and I'm going to be presenting to you the results of a sustainability plan that Osceola completed in 2017. A little bit of background. We've actually been doing a lot of good planning, I think, over the past 10 years. These are some of the plans and initiatives that we have put in place. So the county, when they asked us to look at a sustainability plan, it's actually a little bit different from what you might expect a sustainability plan to be. What they wanted us to do is look at how to build on the planning we had already done, but also they wanted us to address some strategic issues, and those issues were fiscal sustainability, and it's a large part of the plan is devoted to fiscal sustainability. And then also affordable housing and jobs housing balance. These are issues that the board is very concerned about and wanted to be able to talk about how to address them. So I'm going to touch on these one at a time, but what's interesting about them as we looked at them is they seem like some disparate issues, but actually they all, development pattern plays a key role in how these all play out in the county. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how that happens. So I'm going to start with fiscal sustainability. What is fiscal sustainability, first off? We're actually used to, at the local government level, and probably here as well, more used to the term financial feasibility. That's actually a growth management term. It relates to concurrency, and it's a short-term measure. It's basically, can we put the infrastructure in place to deal with development as it's occurring? Fiscal sustainability, though, is a more long-term measure, and what it answers, the question that it answers is, can we afford to maintain our infrastructure and provide services over time? The thing about these two concepts is just because something's fiscally feasible in the short term doesn't mean it's sustainable in the long term. So we needed to look a little bit deeper into how we were developing to determine whether it's fiscally sustainable and how we get there. Is our growth fiscally sustainable? Well, our budget's balanced, but everybody's budget's balanced. Your budget has to be balanced. So the question is, one of the easiest questions, I think, is, are we deferring maintenance? And the answer to that is yes, we are. You know, this is a road. It's probably the best example of where maintenance is deferred, but there's a lot of examples of expenses that are put off, roads that aren't maintained as often as we'd like, things like that that we need to be concerned about. So, and then the next question is, how do we become fiscally sustainable? So to try to figure this out, the county contracted to do a fiscal analysis of revenue generation and expenditures. And we looked at this by various areas of the county because we wanted to see the impact of different development patterns. So what our consultants did for us is to look at 3 different areas of the county. They looked at an area that was a mature, almost built-out area. They looked at an area that was developing. That's on the east side. The mature area is over on the west side. And then they looked at a future area, and that's the one in the center, which is planned out as mixed-use district. We asked them to look at the costs of serving these areas with basic county services and the revenue that would be generated in these various areas. So this is what they came back with. And for this particular chart, I'm just going to ask you to look at the right 2 because those 2 are about the same size. The east side was smaller. The next chart looks at it by acre. But for this one, I think the thing to notice is that the cost to serve the mixed-use area is actually less than that mature area on the west side of the county. So even if the revenue generation were similar, we'd be better off with that mixed-use pattern. But the revenue generation that's projected for that mixed-use area is actually far higher than what we see in the already developed area. When we look at this by acre, and we've got 4 of them now because one of them represents build-out. The number I want to focus on is the difference between revenue generated and the cost of services. So you can see that the best fiscal impact is from that mixed-use area. What I do want to point out, though, is for that area on the west that's already developed, the difference between revenue generated and cost of services is about $500 an acre, which sounds like a very narrow margin, but it's even more narrow because that's over a 25-year period. So that's a cumulative difference there. So basically what that was telling us is that we are cutting it very close on some of our developed areas on making enough revenue to afford to provide services. And some of the patterns that we're looking at putting in place actually have a much better fiscal generation rate. So this is the central area. That's the mixed-use district. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But this analysis was somewhat limited. It did cover the relationship between density and mix of uses and the fiscal impact. But what it didn't cover is the effect of road connectivity on cost of services. It also didn't cover what might happen to an area over time. In other words, it just assumed everything was going along and increasing in value as it would in a perfect world. But these things matter, and in all likelihood, the results that we just saw underestimated the benefits of developing in that more mixed-use pattern. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these factors that we weren't able to address in that particular analysis. This is a fire station in Charlotte, North Carolina. You can see the fire truck, you can see the house on fire and how close they are. But that station actually didn't serve that house because there was no connection. They had to go so far around that they weren't able to get there within the allotted time. And so they looked at it and realized by putting in that 300-foot road connection that you can see there on the drawing, they were able to increase the service area of that fire station by about 17% with one 300-foot connection. What that made them do is to look at all their fire stations and to see what was going on with their fire stations. So this is a chart of all their fire stations and how many households they serve. The biggest one serves almost 27,000 households. The one we were just looking at is the one at the very end that only serves about 5,800 households. And even with the additional service area, it only goes up to about 6,500. It's still the station that serves the least. So that's a huge variation in how many households a station can serve, and it was based or basically a result of how connected the road network was. In the older part of the city, it's a very well-connected road network. In the newer parts of the city, it's much more disconnected. So they actually made policy changes based on this where they don't allow cul-de-sacs, they require road connectivity because they see the connection between the connectivity and what it costs to provide services. And we see this for anything that's a geographically based service. It's the same for sheriff. Response times are going to depend on how they can get from one place to another. Last year when we had our Zika scare and we were doing canvassing of neighborhoods, the staff remarked that if it's a connected road network, they get through it a whole lot faster. So that's important to keep in mind as we are looking to provide services in a fiscally sustainable way. The other thing that we didn't look at, like I said, we just assumed everything was improving and appreciating in value over time, but things happen to areas over time. Decline happens, redevelopment can happen. So we are trying to be cognizant of the importance of developing with the future in mind. So there are some development patterns. Once you develop it, it's very difficult to change versus something that can evolve over time. And what we're trying to do is create areas that can evolve over time. And just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I'm going to look at a development in Orlando. This particular site is just south of downtown. In fact, it's called Soto now. It's an old drive-in theater that was closed and a strip shopping center. They came in here, taxable value at the time, back in '05, before development, was $5.2 million. They came in and they built this development with 75,000 square feet of office, just over 300 residential units, and then the retail and restaurants. They opened that, there it is, they opened it in 2008, in the middle of the worst recession any of us have ever seen. So the value in '05, before they started, was $5.2 million. By 2010, the value was $42 million. And by 2016, it was $71 million. Now, from a planning perspective, what I would tell you is the city didn't have to put a penny into improving the infrastructure for this development to happen. The only road improvement was a bus pullout that was provided by the developer. They were able to put this in here without, and if you're familiar with concurrency, you know that a transportation concurrency analysis probably would have told you that this would be disastrous for Orange Avenue. But fortunately, this is an exception area, and they didn't have to do that because really there's no discernible difference in the traffic. So they have, with this one development, increased the value of that property tremendously. But in addition to that, there's all sorts of other things going on. There are new townhouses going in. This shopping center underwent a complete renovation. This site here is being redeveloped. There are some existing businesses that are renovating those. These two sites were purchased and redeveloped. And I did look up those two sites. One has increased in value over the past couple of years by 100%, the other one by 150%. This site here is property assembly and redevelopment, which is a complicated thing to do. But clearly the value of the land in this area has become such that that is a viable option for redevelopment. And that's what we want to see, is areas that can change over time. Nothing stays the same. You want them to be able to grow and change. And the value of the land is key to that. So to contrast that, this is another site where a Target was built right here, and this is out in West Orange County. Actually, the Target was there, and it moved over to become a Super Target. And when that moved over from that particular shopping center, store opened in 2001, it's already closed. It closed in 2012. But when the Target moved over from the shopping center to the right, those two stores at the end closed. The one has been vacant ever since. The other one has had things in and out of there. But the property value on the one piece has dropped by about 45%. In addition, almost every store in this little strip center next to the Target closed, and I looked at that particular piece of property. It's dropped in value just in 1 year, in the last year, by 23%. The issue with this particular site is it's designed for retail, and it's designed for retail at a very low intensity. It's an auto-oriented environment, and the reason this Target closed is another Target opened up almost 10 miles away, which is a long way to go, but when you're pulling from such a huge area, a significant percentage of the households you're pulling from can just as easily drive to that other Target. So this site was designed for retail at a low intensity. It's surrounded by pods of development behind walls and a 6-lane road. The value of this property is not going to increase because the demand is not going to increase for that kind of use for a very long time. And so because the area is designed the way it is, it's really kind of limited in what you can use this for. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We want areas that can change over time. We don't want to set a pattern in stone. So basically the results of our study were the mature community had the lowest surplus. The developing suburban community did have a surplus, but the biggest surplus in the cost of services versus the revenue was in the mixed-use areas. We also basically reaffirmed that road connectivity matters and that how the development pattern changes over time matters. So we've got recommendations depending on the area that we're talking about. In our mature communities, the infrastructure's set. The homes are there. There is still some development that can happen, but pretty much the pattern is set. So our goals in those areas are to maintain values, to make sure the community has amenities, to plug in complementary uses where possible. In that area, it's heavily residential, so they're looking at putting in some mixed-use centers to try to create the community that will maintain the values. On the east side, which is at the moment developing out as low-density suburban, we want to be able to plug in a mix of uses as well and create the communities that will be able to change over time. The road connectivity is going to be a key issue out there. And then in the mixed-use area, which we're just starting to see develop, our goal is to prioritize development in there, to work with developers and landowners to make sure that area proceeds as it is planned. The second issue they asked us to look at was affordable housing. And this is a tricky one. Everybody's dealing with it right now. I just have a little bit of history. I've gone back a long way here, but I promise to go quickly. We think of 30-year mortgages as kind of a fact of life, but actually as a mechanism, that's less than 100 years old. We had the Great Depression, we had World War II, and 30-year mortgages served the purpose of stabilizing the housing market, just as we had soldiers coming back from World War II and the baby boom beginning, and suburban development just took off because we were able to buy homes. And so this was a highly successful model for housing the country. In the 20 years between 1940 and 1960, the home ownership rate in this country went from under 50% to over 60%. It was a great success. But a lot of things have changed since then. For one thing, homes are larger. In 1950, the average new home was 983 square feet. In 2016, the average new home is over 2,600 square feet. At the same time, households are smaller. Back then, 3.37 people were squeezing into that 900 square feet. And now the average household size is down to 2.54. So basically where we were building 292 square feet per person, we are now building over 1,000 square feet per person. and that's expensive. So the other thing is people need more cars. The way we have built and the way we have spread out has made a car a necessity. So the percentage of households with one car or two cars has gone down, or no cars or one car. The percentage of households with 2 and 3 cars has gone up. The percentage with 3 cars has tripled. Cars are expensive, and the other thing that's interesting about cars is that back to the fiscal sustainability and revenue generation, parking lots are not good revenue generators. They're a big waste of space. So that's a change that has come along as well. Some people haven't, their wages have not been keeping up with inflation. If you're a high wage earner, you're doing fine. Even a medium wage earner, they're okay. Low wage earners have lost ground in the past 30 or 40 years. So that's given us a whole new set of issues to look at. So where we had a highly successful 20 years increasing the home ownership rate by almost 20%, in the next 57 years the home ownership rate increased by 1.8%. And so what I think this tells us is that we have reached some sort of equilibrium. And the solutions that worked so well at one point are not necessarily the ones that are going to meet our needs now. So the question is, what are our needs now and how do we get there? You've probably seen these articles. There'll probably be another one within the next week because the newest report came out that talks about cost burden. It's a report called Out of Reach. And basically what they do is they calculate what they call the housing wage. This is the 2-bedroom housing wage. In case you can't read it for Florida, it's $21.50 an hour. That's what it takes to afford a 2-bedroom apartment without spending more than 30% of your income for housing. Because if you spend more than 30%, you're considered cost burdened. And if you look at it by that metric, in Osceola County, we've got about 41,000 households that are cost burdened, which is 44% of all our households. But this measure doesn't really tell you the whole story just by looking at cost burden. There are things that you need to consider, and we wanted to get a much better picture of who it is we're talking about. So we looked at our income groups, and what you see there for each income group is a bar that represents the whole income group, and if the area is gray, that means they're paying less than 30%. If it's blue, they're paying between 30 and 50%. If it's green, they're paying more than 50% of their income for housing. So it's clear that at less than $20,000 we have an issue. 90% of them are cost burden, most of them at the 50% or more level. At the 20 to 35, the situation has gotten much better. 3/4 of them are still cost burden, but a lot fewer of them are cost burden at that 50% level, so it's somewhat encouraging. I'm going to skip over the next one and talk about 50,000 or more. It's just as clear that at 50,000 or more we don't have an issue. Not very many of them are cost burdened. I did look at the cost burden in this particular income group at the 50% level. There are 28 households in there earning more than $100,000 a year who pay more than half their income for housing. It's not a housing supply problem. That's another problem entirely. There is plenty of supply at some level for that income group. So let's go back to the 35 to 50,000. We still have over half of them cost burdened. But at this level, there are a couple of things to note. One of them is that hardly any of them at this point are cost burdened at the 50% level. In fact, that blue bar that shows cost burdened households from 30 to 50%, a good number of them are cost burdened between 30 and 35%. This is a rule of thumb. Someone who's spending 35% at that income level is not necessarily in dire straits. The other thing about this particular income group is this is the first time homeowners outnumber renters. In fact, 8 out of 10 of the ones who are paying more than 50% are homeowners. So something happened to that homeowner after they got into that homeownership situation. I will tell you, a lot of them are probably elderly and don't have the income they used to have. But when you look at supply numbers, for the most part, supply numbers are there. Not entirely, but there's a lot more supply once you start getting above 35,000. So we really focused on the group earning less than $35,000 a year. And that takes us from 41,000 to 27,000, which is good. Two things to remember about this. One of them is about 1/3 of these folks are elderly. So this isn't always about wages. But the other thing to remember is this does not count people living in motels. They're not part of the data, so we need to take that into account as well. So who are these people? Once we narrowed it down to this income group, we were able to look and see who it is we're talking about here. So these are just some of the groups I think that are overrepresented in that less than $35,000 category. Hospitality workers are 21% of our workforce. Their average annual wage is about $22,000. The elderly, 50% of them have household incomes under $35,000, and a third of them live alone. The other interesting statistic is 3/4 of them are homeowners. So like I said, their situation changed after they got into that house, and now they're in a house that's bigger than they need and more than they can afford. The third one is younger and one-person households. If you're a one-person household, you're earning a lot less. Of course, the median per capita wage is $19,900. And then single-parent households. 11% of our households are single parents, and over 2/3 have incomes below $35,000. I think that's one of the groups most in need because they're trying to raise a family on that income. And the final one here is people living in motels. That's the big question mark. We don't know who they are. We think a lot of them are tourist workers. We think there's single-parent households in there. I will tell you they can easily be paying $1,200 a month to live in those motels because they're paying by the week. So when we look at this group, what it says to us is we may need to meet their needs in a different way. And the other thing I'm going to talk about real quick is household size and housing type, because over half of our households are 1- and 2-person. But when we look at 0- and 1-bedroom units, they constitute 8% of the inventory. So that's a type of housing that could meet that need, but it's not being provided. And it matters because a 1-person household has a median income is only about 60% of the median for the county, and those rents, of course, go up with every bedroom. So as we think about this, what we're trying to think about is what meets the needs of those specific groups at those income levels. We have housing strategies. We have funding from the state and the federal level. We have a comprehensive plan that talks about how to provide housing. We have updated our land development code. We've streamlined our permitting, and we spend money every year on housing. In the past 5 years, we've provided 852 units through our housing funding, and when you compare that to the 27,000 in need, you can see that we're never really going to catch up. So while these things are all good things and necessary things, and we want to continue doing them, we also want to look at how we can address this within the market and try to think of it as not so much affordable housing as just the type of housing that meets the needs of the residents we have. So we know up at 50,000 you're probably okay housing-wise. We know down at the 20,000 level you're probably never going to be okay housing-wise. But there's a gap in there in the middle, and what we want to do is see if we can narrow that gap somewhat with market strategies. So there are two ways to go about that. You can decrease housing costs, or you can increase a household's income or ability to pay. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we do that. I think one of our main goals is to decrease the housing costs by increasing diversity. And the reason for that, I think last year upwards of 80% or more of the housing that we permitted was single-family housing, but 3- or 4-bedroom single-family housing does not work for a household earning $35,000 a year. I plugged the numbers into a magic mortgage calculator on the internet, and it told me if I was a $35,000 a year household with no debt whatsoever and a $10,000 down payment in my pocket, I could afford about $156,000. Sounds a little high to me, but that's what the magic internet said. So, but what it told me was if I have one $300 a month payment, so a car, a cheap car, that number goes down to about $111,000. If I have a $600 payment, it goes down to $65,000. So it's way too unstable of a situation for a household to be in, even under the best of circumstances, to be able to afford that kind of home. What we want to talk about are other types of housing that can meet that need. And so this is something called missing middle housing. You can see the detached single family on one end, and you can see the large apartment complexes on the other end. In between that are all kinds of other housing types, duplex, triplex, bungalow courts, all kinds of housing that actually used to exist, used to be common in a lot of places. You've probably lived in some of these, but they tend to not exist as much anymore. And what we want to do is see if there are ways to encourage and bring back some of these housing types because they can be a source of affordable housing. So what we have right now in Osceola County, we have single family, we have garden apartments, 275 units and up, and we have townhomes. This is what's being provided within our housing market, some more affordable than others. But what we don't see, what we don't have are things like garage apartments. That's a garage apartment there. This is what's called a bungalow court or cottage homes, where you have several homes with a parking lot in back. The density of this is 12 units to the acre. And I know that's one of the things people are really afraid of is density, but they're not afraid so much of density as scale. They're not afraid of 12 units to the acre. They're afraid of 600 units at 12 units to the acre going in right next door. So what we're talking about is something that's on a lot lower scale. This is a single unit apartment building. It's got 12 units in it with parking in the back. It's on half an acre. So that's 24 units to the acre. And right down the street from it are $1 million homes. This is another one. This is 6 units on, I think, 0.17 acre. It equates out to 33 units an acre. And it's surrounded by, once again, $500,000 homes and up. These two, if you see the houses on either side of them, they match the scale of the houses on either side of them, but each one has 4 units in it. It's, I think, 0.3 acres. You can see the single driveway with the parking in the back, so it's the equivalent of about 25, 26 units to the acre. So there's all kinds of ways to put density into a neighborhood. These all came from the same neighborhood, and if you were to drive around that neighborhood, you'd call it a single-family neighborhood. The density in there, though, is probably 9 to 10 units to the acre. And it's a way to provide housing that's more affordable within neighborhoods. The reason development pattern is important is you can't plug that kind of diversity into a typical suburban pattern, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Number one, the ones I just showed you all have 1 parking space or maybe 2 per unit. That does not work in a suburban environment. You need more parking than that. You need walkability. You need a variety of uses nearby, because you're trying to have people get by with fewer cars. A lot of these subdivisions that we have don't have a lot of room for extra parking. The other thing to keep in mind is the whole NIMBY factor and how developing a pattern that's a place can mitigate that factor. So just to look at that unit again that I showed you, that unit is right there. And the next street over, I just pulled a house at random, last sold in 2010 for $1.1 million. It's on 0.15 acres. They don't seem to have an issue with the kind of housing that's around them, and part of the reason for that is that they're in a diverse place. So there's not too much of any one thing anywhere. Everyone can exist in a place like that, and there's doesn't seem to be as much of a NIMBY factor. So we are trying to develop policies to encourage those types of housing throughout areas of the county, especially in the mixed-use districts. The other side of this was the increasing the income and ability to pay. And of course, you can increase people's income, and you guys are probably doing a great job of this because some of your education and training programs are just phenomenal. Or you can decrease their expenses. And 2 of the biggest expenses that households have, aside from housing, are transportation and childcare. This particular chart shows the top 10 and the bottom 10 metro areas based on the percentage of jobs you can get to by transit. And you can see us there. We're number 95. Palm Bay keeps us from being the worst one in the country. But you will notice that several in the bottom 10 are in Florida. And the development pattern just does not lend itself to that kind of transit system. In fact, I was looking at data for Pine Hills up in Orange County years ago, and I discovered that in one 10-year period, the percentage of people who commuted 90 or more minutes to work increased by maybe 700%. When I looked at vehicle ownership, it had actually gone down, and I realized that was a lot more people taking transit, but taking transit is not that viable when it takes more than 90 minutes to get to work. The issue here is if the transit system doesn't work, you need a car. And what we find in our households is if there's 1 worker, there's 1 car, 2 workers, there are 2 more cars, 3 workers, there are 3 more cars, and that is expensive. So when you look at housing costs and you add transportation costs to it, Osceola County ends up being less affordable than some areas that you would think of as very, very expensive, including Montgomery County right outside of D.C., New York City, Austin, and Portland. And you can see the difference in the cost is all related to transportation. We have some of the highest commute times in the country here, and it costs money to commute. So what we need to do is increase the proximity of different uses so people don't have to drive as far or don't have to have two cars, increase walkability, and make our transit viable. How we do that is through the development pattern. So we are looking not only with the mixed-use districts, but throughout the county with our comprehensive plan changes, we are building in centers that create the mix of uses, that create the areas for different housing types, and areas that are walkable and multimodal. And we hope to be able, through this, to provide areas where not as many cars are needed for day-to-day living. So basically, for affordable housing, the recommendation is, number one, to recognize that the model we've had to date may not be the model that's going to help us with the issues we have today. And as I said, we're amending the comp plan, amending our land development code, doing what we can to encourage that diversity of housing. This is a related issue. The last one that I'm going to talk about is jobs housing balance. And if you've been in Osceola County any length of time, you know that Osceola County is basically a bedroom community for Orange County, and it hurts us economically, especially during the last recession. So jobs housing balance is something our board is very interested in achieving. So what is it? Why do we want it? I just explained that, but how do we get there? So basically, what's considered a balance of jobs and housing is 0.75 to 1.5 jobs per household or per housing unit. What we have right now is 0.6. What we are aiming to get to is 0.9, which puts us within that range. There are a lot of benefits to this. Like I said, we have some really long commute times, and we're hoping to reduce the driving and congestion, you know, the air pollution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I do want to point out the last one here is a more fiscally sustainable revenue generation. We have, I think I saw 88% of our developed land is residential. And so the balance of residential to non-residential affects our tax base, and we want to be able to deal with that. This is, of course, a result of our neighbor to the north. This is a jobs housing imbalance chart, and we have one of the highest imbalances in the country with the core of Orlando has, I think, 2-point-something jobs, and the outlying areas have 0.85, and we're even lower than that. And we see that because the workers who live here, in 1970, 20% commuted out of county. 1986, 33%, now more than half commute out of county to go to work. We want to be able to provide those jobs in the county. We want to be able to bring those land uses into the county to even out that tax base. What's interesting about us is there are many types of jobs housing balance, and we actually have aspects of several different kinds here. So we do have this one where you have too many low-wage jobs, not enough low-end housing. That's clear from the tourist sector jobs out on 192. But we also have too few high-end homes, and it's not that we have the jobs, it's that we're trying to attract the jobs, and we need the communities that will attract those jobs. So in addition to having too few high-end homes, we have too few high-wage jobs. So what we want to be able to do is create the kinds of communities that will attract the businesses that we want to see come to this area. And that's what we're working on. We need housing for our low-wage workers, and that's kind of the types we talked about in the affordable housing, but we also need high-wage jobs, and we need to create communities that those kinds of workers want. And they're not really the kinds of communities we might have thought baby boomers wanted. These aren't baby boomers. They don't necessarily want the big house behind the gate. They want the community. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of our analysis, is that what they're looking for is very different from what we might have seen in the past. We also very much want to make our housing values comparable to neighboring counties. It's not that we don't love people coming down here from Orange County, but the reality is it's not good for them. It's a huge commute for them. It's not good for us because there's too much of a disparity in the value of housing when you cross that county boundary. So we have a number of strategies to deal with this. The jobs-based strategies, we have economic development, and once again, job training and placement. There are people-based strategies, that's them. The place-based strategies, and that's where the placemaking comes in. And this is a challenge. We've got places, we've got centers identified in the mixed-use districts, we've identified centers in the developing areas, but here's what we need to remember, and this is that it's a lot of chicken and egg. What comes first? It all depends on each other. The businesses need workers, the workers want the places, and the places need the businesses. So how do we do that? How do we get them here? And one of the challenges for us is that the entire country, Osceola County included, is very over-retailed. And so how we provide the mix of uses, the retail, the services, and the jobs in those centers is going to hinge on being able to provide the rooftops for that retail. So, you know, the centers are designed for the higher density residential, and they're designed for the mix of uses that will serve that residential, will provide the jobs, and will provide the retail experiences and the community that those workers are looking for. And I just wanted to end by kind of going back to this slide that shows SOTO, because relative to the school district and how this affects the school district, you know, we looked at this particular development. They have 308 apartments in there, and I think I put the one bedrooms are 49%, two bedrooms 43, three bedrooms are 8. And that's what we tend to see in these environments. We see smaller units. They're looking to attract a different group of people. And so for this particular one, I did call to check on the student generation. 15 school children come out of there. And that's their tax generation from last year, just for the residential portion of SOTO. So as we look at data, we do see a different demographic coming into these centers, and we need to be able to provide the housing that's wanted by that group of people. So those are the strategies, and I think they're complementary strategies for achieving all of those goals. We have transmitted some updates to our comprehensive plan, but we continue to work on additional updates to the plan, and we'll be working on changing our code. We'll be working on marketing and incentivizing in the mixed-use districts, educating landowners in there, and really trying to prioritize development in those areas. So that's what the county's up to. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Does the board any questions?
Yeah, I have a quick comment or two. First of all, thank you for the presentation, and outstanding job, by the way. You did a really good job of explaining what otherwise could seem like a very complex subject, but I think anybody could follow along with what you presented. So kudos and thank you. Also, as Carrie will say, I shared at the last Planning Commission meeting the importance of making sure that all of us are working together, because we really all do play an important part of what's going on. And one of the last things that you mentioned had to do with the student generation factor and what's happening, and particularly with the new product type that exists. And that's something this board's been talking about, is what do we do to continue to make sure that as the community is growing and developing, it's doing it in a way that's sustainable for us as well. Mm-hmm. And that was part of my comment at the Planning Commission meeting. You know, ironically, I happen to be working on a development in the SOTO area. And so as you were talking about that, I know it very well, and I know exactly what you're talking about and exactly what it is that we need to bring to our community to support that. As a whole, this board has been very focused on making sure that when we have a conversation about growth and development in the community, it's done in a way to where the impact that it has on the school district is always kept front of mind. You showed a slide earlier that shows what comes first, the chicken or the egg, was the comment that you made, and I think that's been a lot of what our conversation as a school board and school district has been. We're working, as you know, with a high degree of intentionality to make sure that we're preparing the workforce that we know ultimately we want in our community. And I will just share that I'm pleased to see the work that the county's doing to make sure that we're taking a really good look at how we grow and how we develop and how we attract the employers ultimately that we're preparing to grow right here in our own community. A phrase that I've used a lot is that education is a precursor to economic development. So in order for those jobs to show up, which means in order for those houses or those housing types to be built, we have to do our part here as well. And so I think I'll end with that by saying that, and I believe I could speak for the entire board and the superintendent and staff, is that the partnership between the county and this school district is vitally important, because if we work in silos, we'll become disjointed and we won't really understand the impact of what we're doing and what it has on you, and likewise the impact of what you do has on us. And that also crosses over into the way that we develop our schools, including some of the cost factors that get imposed upon us with the development of schools, with some of the initiatives that I know that the county has as well. Because as you know, we're stretching our capital dollars as far as we can. So my concluding statement is simply that the more we work together, the more that we collaborate on what it is we're doing, the more that our staff and your staff is having this conversation, and as much as the elected bodies are partnering with one another, the better we serve our collective constituents in the right way. So thank you.
Nice job, Susan. One quick question for you. When we talked about this a few weeks ago, I was wondering if you just share, you talked about the research you'd done on houses just north of the county line versus houses this side of the county line, and the differential in...
We've looked at the median housing value of the two counties, and when you cross the county boundary from Orange to Osceola County, the median value drops by about $30,000. But when you go back and look at housing built since 2014, and you cross that county boundary, the value drops by about $80,000. And part of that,
similar home, right?
Well, it's just the median value of all housing. I think part of that is reflected in what's happening in Orange County and where they're developing. So the type of product that's being developed is affected by that. But we have a lot more land left. We have a more affordable environment.
And just one last question, and you may not know the answer to this, but when we just did our impact fee study, I don't know, 6 months, a year ago, whenever it was, one of the things that came out in that study was our average age of our population is considerably lower than Orange County's. And I know a lot of the growth and some of those things you showed in the 15 students in the apartments and that sort of stuff, some of that lower age, I think, is driving some of those things for us. Did y'all look at that or think about that, or do you think these changes are going to drive our average age up, or what? Or is it, do you see we see an impact that we're getting because of the lower age, lower home values, more students?
Well, and it is kind of a chicken or egg, because I think a lot of them are people who can't afford to buy where they live or where they work. They drive till they qualify, as they call it, and a lot of times that ends up being Osceola County. So we do have a different demographic here, larger households, larger families, we're younger. I think it's going to be an incremental change as we change the environment, change the job base. I think you're going to start seeing a different group of people coming here, for one. One of the things we did look at, because I know what a challenge it is to look at units, especially multifamily by size, but 97% of units are occupied by one person or fewer per room. So a studio, for instance, one person, that's pretty much what you see there. We don't have very many of them. So Orange County has a much higher percentage of those kind of units, and people live where they can find a place to live. So it is a lot of back and forth trying to figure that out.
Anything else?
Just one last, this is a little side, but you're here, so I'll share it. I'm actually supposed to be in Chicago right now with the National Association of Realtors. I serve on a small group. There's 1.3 million of us across the country, but there's 35 of us that work on what's called strategic thinking. Everything that impacts home ownership rates, affordability, all of those factors in the United States. And I share that because the conversation that my group's having while I'm here and will be going to this week is, what does the next 50 years of housing look like in the United States of America, and what is it that we need to be doing to make sure that home ownership is a key component of that, because we know home ownership is also a key component of stability of community. And we've done studies over the years from the National Association of Realtors on the impact that home ownership has in all of these areas of civic engagement, education, outcomes, so on and so forth. So since you're standing here, I wanted to bring that up because whatever I can do to support your work and bringing down the resources that I have at the national level to our community to help shape that conversation, reach out to me personally, and I'd be glad to do anything I can with that. We have incredible studies and some of the best minds in the world, if not just the nation, that work with us day in and day out and talking about the very things that you guys just went through. And the slides that you showed, by the way, please send them to all of us. This is like fun, beauty stuff for me. I could just sit here all night, although I think the rest of the room was glazed over. I was like excited. But whatever I can do to support your work, selfishly as someone who grew up in this community, I want to, but selfishly as a board member, I want to, because we have to get it right together. So thank you.
Okay. And I believe you have the presentation already, so, yeah.
We'll get it from Ruben. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Susan.
Thank you.
Dr. Pace, appointments and transfers?
Yes, good evening, board members. We come to another exciting part of our evening agenda. As I have shared with the board, Mr. David Naylor, assistant principal at St. Cloud Elementary School, has recently taken a new position as a principal in Kentucky. We're very excited and proud for David, but that leaves a big hole at St. Cloud Elementary School, so I'd like to invite Miss Amy Flowers up to the podium. As you know, Board, Ms. Flowers has served the district well with a lot of distinguished service at Parton Settlement as an assistant principal, but she also began her career, I believe, at St. Cloud Elementary School, or at least worked there.
Ross Jeffries.
Ross
Kenansville.
Jeffries, St. Cloud Elementary School, Kenansville, exactly. She followed the routes of my mother when she was a teacher at Ross Jeffries in Kenansville. But we are proud, and Amy has willingly stepped up to the challenge to take on the new role as assistant principal at St. Cloud Elementary School. As I shared with the board this week, we knew that we needed somebody with that level of experience and leadership, as Miss Megan Derricks is here today with her brand new little baby, and we want to give her a little bit more time to enjoy being mom, but not leave such a hole at St. Cloud Elementary School. So I'm proud to recommend her for a transfer to St. Cloud Elementary School.
Motion to approve.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing
Aaron, you
none.
need help?
Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those like sign, motion carries 3-0. Congratulations. Good luck to you.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Now, if I can invite Miss Elizabeth Lane up to the podium. Board members, I learned this week that Elizabeth started her career in 1991 in student services with Ida Faye Oglesby. I'm sure she was only 10 at the time. And since that time, she has been the project director for the Safe School Healthy Student Federal Grant, supervisor of social studies, of students of social services in the Student Services Department. She received her bachelor's degree in human services from Southeastern University and earned a master's degree in counseling and psychology from Palm Beach Atlantic. And Elizabeth is one of those people who's 24/7 on the task when our needs are great, and we are so proud to recommend her as our new coordinator of student services.
Motion to approve. Go Sailfish.
Second?
I have a motion to approve and second. Any further discussion, board? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 3-0. Congratulations and good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Our next recommendation, board, could not be with us tonight, but Valerie Rivera Martinez, we are recommending as our new coordinator of multicultural education to support the great work that we have there with our greater needs with the influx of students. During her career, Valerie began as a teacher at Gateway High School. She's been an ESOL educational specialist at Neptune Middle, served as an ESOL specialist here in the district for math and science, secondary science curriculum specialist in the district, science teacher at Parkway at Neptune, educational specialist for the district, senior administrator and now director of multilingual student education service director for Orange County Public Schools, and I very much want to welcome her back to the team.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion is second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0.
And Valerie would be here if she could, but she's got a brand new baby. And next we'd like to invite Miss Vicki Hickey up to the podium. I apologize, Victoria Hickey.
It's okay. They won't forget me when you use that name.
Board, it's my pleasure to recommend Ms. Hickey for your consideration as our Director of Secondary Education. She has been a teacher at Johnson Junior High, assistant principal at Jefferson Middle, sales and strategic marketing for educational support for Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, school improvement and differentiated accountability teacher for Brevard Public Schools, assistant principal at Astronaut, and currently serves as the principal at Rockledge High School in Brevard. She received her bachelor's degree in English education from Tennessee Technological University, a master's in educational leadership from Nova Southeastern University. I'm confident she will be another asset to our team.
Motion to approve.
Second.
A motion is second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 3-0. Good luck to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate Dr. Pace and her leadership team for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to serving Osceola County.
Great.
Awesome.
Welcome. That concluded. This brings us to our public comment section of the meeting, and normally there'd be yellow sheets submitted, which I've seen none. So I assume there's no public comment. So that brings us to the consent agenda modifications. Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't see a yellow sheet. Just have a comment.
Yeah, come on up, and we'll get you to fill one out after you're done, just so she has it for the record, if that's okay. Just please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Albert Koningsberg. My address is 5575 Northeast Trieste Way, and that's down in Boca Raton, Florida. Good afternoon, Dr. Pace. The reason why I've come here today, and Mr. Weishauer, I appreciate what you had discussed about the aggregation of data and the relationship between the county and the school board. My interest is in the safety and the security of children and our schools. I am just curious, who is the point of contact for your county doing your risk assessment?
Our district safe school specialist is Mr. Lester Yates, Yeates. And we're doing our school assessments with our local sheriff's department.
Okay. Will you make that available August 1st to the state?
We are going to provide the information that's required to the state by August 1st, yes, sir.
Okay. And any communication that I could have with Mr. Yates?
He's standing in the back. He'd be happy to talk with you out in the lobby after
Very
your
good.
comments.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. If you would.
You do need to fill out the form.
Fill out and just, you can hand it up to one of us. Thank you. Any other person wishing to address the board? That brings us to agenda modifications. Calvin, any changes? Nope.
Yeah, Board, I want to pull from consent 12.01, 12.02, 12.03, and 04.
Seeking a pattern here. Dr. Pace, any changes, modifications?
No, sir.
Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve consent with the modifications presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Weishauer, the second by Mr. Soto. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those like sign, motion carries 3-0. And bring us to item 12.01.
Sure. Board, the reason I pulled these have to do with the sale of surplus property. It's in line with what the board had discussed previously. I just want to ask that we table this item so I have a little bit extra time to talk with the superintendent and legal counsel regarding these particular properties and what our plans are with them. So at this time, I would make a motion to table items 12.01 through 12.04.
Do we need to do those one at a time, Tanya, or can we do them in a group like that?
You could pull all.
We can do it, okay. I just, with this new system, I'll make sure we.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. I likewise, and I've already shared some of my questions with these on Dr. Pace. So, we need to vote on tabling?
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Weishauer, second by Mr. Soto to table items 12.01, 02, 03, and 04. Board, any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0.
Thank you, Board, for your support on that.
Let's see. That brings us to information items. Presentation of mental health assistance allocation plan. Mr. Phelps.
Good evening, Superintendent and board members. I appreciate your willingness to hear a brief presentation tonight for the proposed mental health assistant allocation plan as required by Senate Bill 7026. This school board and superintendent have made health and safety of our students a high priority by including mental health needs of our students on our strategic plan. The proposed mental health assistant plan outlines strategies for identifying students in need of mental health services, as well as a system to deliver the services. The plan is on the agenda later this evening for your review, and we are also requesting approval this evening. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Bungo and to Ms. Lane to provide you with a very brief overview of the mental health assistance plan and also to answer any questions you may have.
Good evening. On February 14, 2018, 17 students and adults were shot and killed in what has been termed the biggest school shooting in American history. As a result, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, or Senate Bill 7026, was enacted on March 5, 2018. It requires all school districts in Florida to develop a plan that provides mental health service availability for all students. All 67 Florida school districts will receive a $100,000 base allocation and a portion of the FTE allotment per student. Allocations must be spent on a specified plan that is approved by each district school board and submitted to the Florida Department of Education. We are here tonight to present the proposed plan for Osceola County, which includes the specific elements required by this legislation. The allocations for each school district include charter school allocations, and charter schools must submit a plan to their governing board for approval. Once approved by their board, plans must be submitted to the district for inclusion in the information provided to the Department of Education. The school district already has a strong infrastructure which provides for the referral of students to mental health agencies for services. In order to make services available for all of our students, our plan calls for the personnel you see outlined on the slide. The addition of this staff will allow for an increase in days that mental health persons are available at the schools for students and to serve as part of the threat assessment team, which I will explain further. Other requirements include the annual submission of data, which is due September 30th of 2019, the training of all school personnel in mental health awareness, and a threat assessment team established at every school. In summary, our plan calls for an increase in mental health staff to provide services, continued coordination with our community health agencies, threat assessment teams at each school made up of administrators, instructional personnel, mental health professionals, and law enforcement officers, and a 2-hour mental health awareness training provided to all school employees.
Questions?
You said brief, didn't you? I said brief.
I have one quick question. The $1.6 million, does that cover 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 people? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes, and there's extra left remaining.
Okay, so that, okay, is that it? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the brevity.
And again, Board, if I could just add, one of the things that we want to do to build sustainability into this plan that we talked about at our strategic plan workshop is to really work on a more aggressive pattern for the Medicaid expense reimbursement, so that should these funds not be allocated in future years, we would still be able to provide this level of service to our students and community.
And now we have the summer reading program. There's Scott Clark. Didn't find you. You have a green shirt on.
Yeah, I switched for the night, dressed up a little bit. Good evening, Board, and thank you for this opportunity. We are already in full rolling movement of our summer reading plan. We have started this, and we are excited as we continue through. I'm going to go over just a few things about the difference in our plan. As we did our plan this year, we made it a little different. We adjusted and made the plan based on the different grade levels, the elementary, the middle school, and the high school. We had this plan put together, and we incorporated our media specialists at each of those levels to help us come up and create this plan, as well as speaking with people from the schools. We included book lists, we included activities, and this year we bumped it up a notch and we added social media to it to make that presence known. We've included prizes and so much more. We did continue on. The First Lady of the state of Florida had the 2018 Summer Literacy Adventure where our students would sign a pledge. We also continued on with partnerships within the community, and with the close proximity of the Fire Frogs, we already had our first event take place on May 25th, which was the summer reading kickoff, and this is where students who signed the summer literacy pledge online were able to get in free to the baseball game over for the Fire Frogs night. Our other partnership that occurred that night is we had Osceola Reads there, and they were there trying to get our younger children that would come with those siblings to sign up for Footsteps to Brilliance as well. So we're incorporating Osceola Reads with any event that we have going on. Our final activity with the Fire Frogs is going to be August 24th, that after any of the children that complete the summer reading program and turn in anything at their school, they will get the opportunity to get a ticket to the game with a paying adult. And last year when we did this event at the Fire Frogs game, the students got to walk around the field, and then they got to be on the big screen out there, and the parents and everybody came up and said how excited their child was, and that it was well worth reading during the summer in order to get that opportunity to be on the ball field. So looking at our elementary plan, we decided to go with a bingo situation. So what this does, it gives students several choices of activities and things to do. One of the squares in there is to sign the pledge from the governor's wife, or to even include Scholastic. When we go to the next slide, we'll show you things on there. At the end of the summer, if they complete a bingo, they get one of these commemorative dog tags that will be given to them. One of the things is during the school year, when they read so many Sunshine State reader books, they get these little articles and they put them on there, and they love receiving those and displaying those on their backpacks. It will be geared toward kindergartners through 5th grade, and currently 5th grade students, we were trying to persuade them to go ahead and step up to the middle school challenge. And the next slide there shows you a lot of the things that are on the chart for the elementary students to do. Read a book about an animal. There's quite a few things. So hopefully if you have any elementary children in your families, they will do some of these activities with you. Give you a second to look at those. I thought one there, learn to read a map during your travels. There you go. Not that we do that often anymore, but I'm sure they may be looking at a cell phone. All right, we were excited that Accelerate Reader is one of the partners that we've used before. They actually acquired the company Mayan, which is a digital version of a lot of books that students can read. Well, those two companies are now all in one, and this summer they offered access for our students for K through 5 in order to read Mayan books online this summer, but also Accelerate Reader is available for all K to 8 students to take quizzes from home as well. So that was something that they stepped up and allowed for us. So that's elementary. If you have questions throughout, let me know. Middle school, they actually took one of the Sunshine State Reader books for this summer called The Eureka Key, and they were suggesting that all students read this book as well. Students are going to have a weekly photo challenge with 8 tasks that they can post via social media using the hashtag SDOC Bookstagram and hashtag Eureka Key. For any students that don't use social media, they are able to also keep track of this and then take those photos and share them with their media specialists, and they will be recognized when they return during the summer. Kickoff and incentives are going to be school-based. Each of the media specialists were to go back and work with their schools and come up with a plan to help motivate that. As you see this one, this is the middle school one. They earn points for each of these different sections. I'm not sure if you can read those on there, but these are some of the activities that our media specialists and their students came up with this for ideas of things to do. Next, last summer, we had the challenge of trying to get high school students to participate in the program that we had set. So this year we decided let's try to step it up and go into things that they like. such as Instagram. These students are social media fiends and they like this. So what we did is we had the students follow a summer theme and post on Instagram. We have received some of these posts, and we have awarded our first student from the first week already a $10 gift certificate, and I can't remember what the location was, but we are giving out gift cards and other various prizes that we have acquired. Winners will be chosen weekly, and students must include the following in order to be eligible. They have to have a quote from the book, a hashtag, and tag our MITD so we can track it. And if you proceed forward, here is the theme for each of the weeks that we have. Take a picture of a book, do a selfie. You know they do selfies. Travel with a book. So anybody that goes on a trip somewhere, have that book, take a picture with it there. Rainy day reading. We put that out this week, and we've already had submissions, although it hasn't rained so much here the last day or so, but a week ago it did. And then we have a theme for each of those steps of the way.
Before you move on.
Yes.
Mr. Thacker, selfies when you turn the camera around and you take a picture of yourself. I just wanted to, yeah, exactly. Maybe proceed.
There you go. So throughout the whole summer, as we've continued to announce this to our students in schools, there are several items that we have available. Within ClassLink, all the students have a summer reading folder, and in that summer reading folder, we have placed all the resources we have. English and Spanish ebooks are also made available through Mac and Via. With our large influx of students that came from Puerto Rico, we made sure we bumped up the number of Spanish titles this summer, so those would be available for them as well. We have Footsteps to Brilliance, Accelerate Reader, Mayan, iReady, and as well Achieve 3000 is in there in that set of icons that we have as well. So overall, that is our things that we have available to our students, and they are excitedly participating.
Do you know how big your participation is?
I will know more as we get a little bit further. We just got the start. I do know we've had some high school submissions, but that's exciting because last year we really only had a handful of students that showed a lot of evidence that they had done it. This year we're getting a little bit more participation. And that's why this year we kind of turned it around to be a little more school-based with the media specialists, because they could promote it a little more with their students at their school.
Any questions?
How is the district engaging with parents to let them know about these programs and about these, the availability of all this?
Right, we shot out some of that information. The media specialist had some flyers. The bingo cards for the elementary kids, those were all sent home with them. We've put it through social media with Osceola Schools, our community relations department, when we did the baseball game that night. Osceola Reads also, anytime we put an event out, they actually even advertise it through them as well. So, all right.
My comment is just thank you. You know, we know how much work takes place in the summer months at the school district because we're a part of that conversation, but the community many times doesn't know all the work that happens and all the resources available and all the effort that's put into making sure that summer months are still impactful for students learning. And so I want to make sure you know that we appreciate everything you do, not just throughout the school year, but throughout the calendar year as a whole.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it. All right.
The next two informational items are in our packets, and no presentation on those. That brings us to our regular agenda, item 14.
Just a quick comment. Mr. Boyd's still here, right? Or no?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Can we add, and I believe it's on, when we get to our school board rulemaking workshops, there's an additional column that has to do with like where the rule provision or change is coming from, like recommendation from that one group or whatever. On this chart here that we have, it would be helpful for me if we added a column that has like required by law, checked or not. A lot of times the rule revisions that are being proposed to us are really just complying with state statute. It would benefit me just to have that real quick reference point as an additional column.
Absolutely, sir. We'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Tammy's making a note.
Thanks, Tammy.
Item 14 on our agenda board.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Weishauer, the second by Mr. Soto for item 14.01. All those, any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 3-0.
1501, motion to approve.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Weishauer to approve 15.01 with a second by Mr. Soto. Board, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 3-0.
1601, motion to approve.
I have a motion by Mr. Weishauer to approve 16.01 with a second by Mr. Soto. Board discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign.
1701,
Carries
motion to
3-0.
approve. Sorry, Chairman.
Okay. Go right ahead.
Are you good, Tom? Okay, 1701, motion to approve.
I have a motion by Mr. Weishauer to approve 17.01 and a second by Mr. Soto. Board, any discussion? I actually have a question on this. I know that there's been some struggles with this, and this is a one-year continuation, correct?
Yes, sir. It is a one-year extension with the conditions specified in the agreement. Ms. Valent, the school board chair for Avant-Garde, is here along with Mr. Bolaños and other members of the staff, and they did sign the agreement before we submitted it to the agenda for your approval.
Okay, and you feel they've got a plan in place that can turn it around, or?
Yes, sir. I do have some concerns about the most recent score release. We'll be digging into those with them and working with them, but I feel confident that the one-year conditional extension is I recommend at this time.
Okay. Board, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 3-0. Brings us to attorney.
No report.
Rippenbacher. Dr. Pace.
Nothing further, sir.
And no unfinished business or new business. Any board member comments or superintendent? None?
Two brief ones.
Go ahead.
One is thank you guys for your support with the Florida School Boards Association. As you know, last week I had the honor of being elected as president-elect for that organization, which will mean I'll become president in 2019. But as I shared with you guys previously, I'm willing to do that because I believe in the overall direction that we've been going as a board and the tone that we've been setting about what should happen in education, not just here at our local community, but across the state of Florida. And I want to express personal thanks to you, Mr. Thacker, for your effort in making sure you were at the meeting on Wednesday morning regarding the conversation about health insurance in the state of Florida and what it is we need to do as school boards, as an association, to continue to try to tackle that. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for your support on that. And then probably second and more important comment is I just want to make a note of how much smoother our board meetings run without Mr. Booth and without Mr. Wheeler. So we may want to consider just doing this three guys in the future.
We're going to have that three-board discussion?
Yeah.
The three-member.
Mr. Soto, are you okay with that?
I missed them.
I'm kidding. Thank you, Vice Chair, for stepping in as chair tonight. Good job.
No problem. Hearing no other, oops,
Share one thing.
you already had your chance. We passed you.
I'm sorry, but you were going to give some direction tonight that we look at the health program. You wanted us to
Yes, I know.
explore opportunities.
I wanted to, thank you for reminding me. I appreciate that. The healthcare and the wellness center that we have, I know our contract is through April with our current providers, but I think we need to start looking hard at what we want to do in the future, and I know that stuff takes time, and I just want to go ahead and get it on the radar of what we would do to open that up with an RFP, because I don't want to get to March and everybody will go, it's too late. So I just want to tell you, from my viewpoint, I'd like to see us start opening that and taking a look and preparing ourselves for what needs to be done there. Board, I don't know if you've got any other thoughts or comments.
Yes, I do briefly. Just based on what I've been looking at and studying, I really, really favor a change. So I would not want to delay so that we get the best opportunity to figure out what that change is going to be. But certainly cannot stay the way it is.
Yeah, I'm on board. I mean, you have the full head nod of the board at
Yep.
this point to go forward with beginning the RFP process and seeing what options exist.
Yeah, thank you very much for reminding me.
Thank you.
I drew a blank. Anything else? Hearing none, we'll stand adjourned.